The summer heat shimmered over Sycamore Lane like a suffocating blanket, pressing down on meticulously trimmed lawns and perfectly aligned mailboxes. Elena Rodriguez stood at her kitchen window, hands deep in soil-stained gardening gloves, her reflection a study in determination against the gleaming glass. Behind her, rows of carefully nurtured plants told a story far more complex than mere vegetation. They were a living connection to her roots, a testament to her grandmother's wisdom, and now, apparently, a declaration of war against the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association. The letter arrived that morning with the precision of a surgical strike. White envelope, crisp edges, the HOA letterhead emblazoned like an official seal of disapproval. Elena's fingers traced the embossed logo, a stylized house surrounded by impossibly perfect hedges, as she read the words that would change everything. Violation notice. It screamed in bold, unforgiving capital letters. Violation of Landscape Ordinance 6.2. Unauthorized agricultural production in residential zone. The language was clinical, devoid of any human understanding. Each word felt like a personal attack, a systematic dismantling of her most cherished connection to her heritage. Elena's mind drifted to her abuela, Maria Rodriguez, who had taught her the art of gardening in the small backyard of their first modest home. Those lessons were more than just agricultural instruction. They were stories of survival, of immigrant resilience, of finding home in a patch of earth that could be transformed by loving hands. Her grandmother had fled political turmoil in Chile, bringing with her seeds carefully hidden in the lining of an old coat. Maija, she would say, her weathered hands guiding Elena's smaller ones. The most powerful act of resistance is to grow something beautiful where others say nothing can survive. The garden was a living memory. Heirloom tomatoes with deep red skin, passed down through generations. Heritage peppers that carried the heat of her family's homeland. Herbs that filled the air with memories of her grandmother's kitchen. Each plant was a connection, a story, a piece of her identity that now sat squarely in the crosshairs of the Pinewood Estates HOA. Maxwell Thornton, the board president, was legendary in their community, and not in a good way. A retired middle manager with nothing but time and an obsessive commitment to suburban conformity, he saw any deviation from the approved landscape as a personal affront. His own lawn was a monument to chemical perfection. Not a single dandelion dared to show its head. Not a blade of grass grew out of mathematical alignment. Elena knew the rules. She had read them meticulously when she bought the house 3 years ago. Section 6, paragraph 2 was crystal clear. Landscaping must consist of approved grass varieties, ornamental shrubs, and decorative flora. No agricultural production shall be permitted in front or side yards. But this was more than a garden. This was her connection to family, to history, to the very essence of who she was. The HOA warning continued, listing potential fines that started at $250 and escalated quickly. A daily fine of $50 would be imposed until the unauthorized vegetation was removed. They gave her precisely 7 days to comply. 7 days to erase a living memory. Outside, the garden continued to thrive, seemingly oblivious to the bureaucratic threat. Tomato vines climbed their carefully placed trellises, peppers hung like jewels, herbs released their fragrant defiance with every gentle breeze. Elena knew then that this was about more than just plants. This was about identity, about the right to exist in a space that demanded conformity. She smoothed out the letter, its crisp edges now slightly crumpled from her grip. A smile began to form, not of defeat, but of determination. Maxwell Thornton and the Pinewood Estates HOA had just declared war, and Elena Rodriguez was prepared to fight. The first stone had been cast, and she would not be the one to back down. The digital clock on Elena's forensic accounting workstation read 2:37 a.m. Surrounding her were stacks of documents, multiple computer screens displaying spreadsheets, HOA bylaws, and property records. Cold coffee sat forgotten beside a half-eaten empanada, a testament to hours of uninterrupted research. Elena Rodriguez was not the type of woman to accept defeat quietly. Where others might have seen a simple garden violation, she saw a complex system of bureaucratic control waiting to be dismantled. Her professional life as a forensic accountant had trained her to see patterns invisible to most. She understood that regulations were rarely about protection. They were about control. The HOA's bylaws were a labyrinth of deliberately confusing language, designed to intimidate and suppress. Each document told a story: property management contracts that seemed suspiciously interconnected, fines issued with remarkable frequency to certain homeowners, selective enforcement that reeked of personal vendetta rather than community management. She thought back to her parents' journey, immigrants who had navigated a complex legal system, who had understood that knowledge was the most powerful form of resistance. Her father, a civil engineer who had to restart his entire career after arriving in the United States, had taught her that every system has vulnerabilities. Her mother, a high school teacher, had shown her that persistence could move mountains. The HOA's violation notice was more than a piece of paper. It was a challenge. Alina's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling records, cross-referencing data. The Pinewood Estates HOA had been operating with a level of opacity that would make most government bureaucracies look transparent. Financial records were a maze of shell companies and questionable expenditures. One particular line item caught her attention: landscape maintenance contracts awarded to a company called Green Horizon Solutions. The company's address traced back to a residential property owned by Maxwell Thornton's nephew, Jason. Coincidence? Alina didn't believe in them. She began compiling a dossier: property tax records, contractor licenses, board meeting minutes. Each document was a piece of a larger puzzle. The more she investigated, the more she realized this was about far more than her garden. This was about a systemic abuse of power that had been happening right under everyone's noses. Her phone buzzed. A text from Martha Jenkins, her next-door neighbor. "You okay? Saw the HOA letter." Martha was a retired postal worker, a woman who had seen her fair share of bureaucratic nonsense. Alina had always appreciated her no-nonsense attitude and keen eye for detail. "Working on something." Alina typed back, "Want to come over for coffee?" An hour later, Martha sat at Alina's kitchen table, reading through the initial findings. Her weathered hands adjusted reading glasses as she studied the documents. "They've been pulling this for years," Martha muttered, pointing to a pattern of suspicious contract awards. "Remember when they made me remove my bird sanctuary? Said it was attracting rodents. Now I see why." The bird sanctuary had been Martha's pride and joy. A carefully curated space that attracted local wildlife, a small rebellion against the sterile landscape mandated by the HOA. Its removal had been a personal wound, one that had never fully healed. Alina realized she was not alone in her frustration. The HOA's rigid control had been suffocating the community's spirit, one regulation at a time. "We need a plan," Alina said, spreading the documents across the table. "Not just for my garden, for everyone." Martha's eyes sparkled with a mixture of determination and mischief. "I'm listening." As dawn broke, casting long shadows across Sycamore Lane, a revolution was taking root, not with violence or anger, but with meticulously gathered evidence, community solidarity, and an unwavering belief that bureaucracy could be challenged. The roots of resistance had begun to grow, and they were far stronger than any HOA regulation could contain. The backyard of Alina Rodriguez's house had never been more alive. What was once a simple garden gathering had transformed into a clandestine war room of suburban resistance. Folding chairs were arranged in a tight circle, surrounded by the vibrant greenery that had sparked the entire conflict. The scent of fresh herbs and ripe tomatoes mingled with the tension of hushed conversations. Tom Harrison arrived first, his military bearing evident in the way he surveyed the space before sitting. A retired Marine Corps logistics officer, Tom had his own long-standing grudge with the HOA. 2 years ago, they had issued him a citation for displaying an American flag that was 2 inches larger than the approved dimensions. The absurdity of the citation still burned in his memory. Martha Jenkins brought her famous empanadas, a peace offering and fuel for their growing rebellion. Her hands, weathered from years of postal service, carefully laid out the treats on a worn wooden tray. The birdhouse incident was still fresh. The HOA had forced her to remove the intricate habitat she'd spent years cultivating, claiming it attracted undesirable wildlife. One by one, neighbors arrived, some cautiously, others with a barely contained excitement of those about to break free from long-standing oppression. Elena watched as the group assembled, each with their own story of HOA-inflicted frustration. There was Carlos Mendez, whose modern architectural additions had been repeatedly rejected despite meeting every technical requirement. Sarah Goldstein, whose small solar panel installation had been blocked multiple times without clear justification. The Pato family, who had fought a months-long battle over the color of their front door. "We're not just fighting about a garden," Elena began, spreading out the documents she and Martha had painstakingly collected. "We're fighting about the right to exist in our own homes." The evidence was damning. Contracts awarded without proper bidding, selective enforcement of rules that seemed to target specific homeowners, financial discrepancies that suggested more than simple bureaucratic inefficiency. Tom leaned forward, his military strategic training kicking in. "We need more than just evidence," he said. "We need a plan of action." The group began to dissect the HOA's structure. Elena had discovered that board meetings were technically open to all homeowners, but intentionally scheduled at inconvenient times. Voting processes were intentionally complicated, designed to minimize participation. "They've created a system that looks democratic on the surface," Martha explained, her years of postal service having given her an insider's view of bureaucratic manipulation, but is actually designed to maintain a stranglehold of control. Carlos shared his experience with architectural review committees. "It's not about maintaining community standards," he explained. "It's about maintaining a very narrow, outdated vision of what a neighborhood should look like." As the evening progressed, what started as individual grievances began to coalesce into a unified strategy. They weren't just fighting against something. They were fighting for something. The right to express individuality. The right to make their homes truly their own. Sarah Patel, usually quiet, spoke up. "My grandmother used to say that a community is strongest when it celebrates differences, not suppresses them." The plan took shape. They would systematically document every HOA violation and selective enforcement. Organize homeowners to attend board meetings en masse. Challenge financial records and contract awards. Support each other's appeals and citations. Outside, Elena's garden seemed to listen. Tomato vines climbed their trellises, peppers hummed like bright flags of defiance. The plants that had started this entire conflict now bore witness to a growing rebellion. As the meeting concluded, a sense of nervous excitement filled the air. They weren't just neighbors anymore. They were a movement. The storm was gathering, and the Pinewood Estates HOA had no idea what was coming. The fluorescent lights of the community center flickered with an ominous rhythm, casting long shadows across rows of uncomfortable folding chairs. Elena Rodriguez sat at the back, her forensic accounting briefcase clutched like a shield, her eyes scanning the room with the precision of a military strategist. Tonight was the monthly HOA board meeting, a ritual of bureaucratic tedium that had long been designed to discourage genuine participation. Maxwell Thornton presided from the front table, his perfectly pressed khakis and meticulously parted hair a testament to his obsession with control. But tonight would be different. Elena had spent weeks preparing. Her investigation had uncovered a web of financial irregularities that would make even the most complex money laundering scheme look amateur. Jason Thornton, Maxwell's nephew, had been awarded multiple maintenance contracts through a series of shell companies, a practice so blatant it bordered on comical if it weren't so serious. The first piece of evidence was a series of landscaping contracts awarded to Green Horizon Solutions. On the surface, they appeared legitimate. Dig deeper, and the facade crumbled. The company's address was a small suburban home owned by Jason. The invoices showed inflated prices for minimal work, with suspicious repetitions that suggested fabricated services. Tom Harrison, sitting nearby, leaned in. His military intelligence background had helped Elena connect the dots. "Look at the invoice dates," he whispered. "They're submitting bills for work done on days when no actual maintenance could have occurred." The numbers told a story of systematic fraud. Invoices for tree trimming during winter months, lawn maintenance during record-breaking rainstorms, Landscaping work billed on days when temperature records showed impossible working conditions. But it wasn't just about the money. This was about a fundamental breach of trust. Carlos Mendez had brought his architectural expertise to the investigation. He discovered that the HOA's architectural review process was equally compromised. Certain homeowners, those with connections to the board, received rapid approvals for projects that would have been rejected for others. Martha Jenkins had her own contribution. Years of postal service had taught her how to navigate bureaucratic systems. She'd obtained copies of communication records that showed a pattern of selective enforcement. Complaints against certain homeowners were fast-tracked, while others were conveniently lost. As the meeting began, Maxwell Thornton droned on about community standards and the importance of maintaining property values. Elena watched, gathering her thoughts, waiting for the right moment. The financial report came first, a mind-numbing recitation of expenses that typically would have put most attendees to sleep, but not tonight. When the time came for new business, Elena raised her hand. "I have some questions about our recent maintenance contracts," she said, her voice calm and clear. Maxwell's smile faltered for just a moment, a micro-expression that spoke volumes. What followed was a surgical deconstruction of the HOA's financial practices. Elena presented evidence with the precision of a surgeon. Each slide, each document exposed another layer of misconduct. Inflated invoices, contracts awarded without proper bidding, financial transfers that raised significant red flags. The room grew increasingly tense. Homeowners who had previously sat in silent resignation now leaned forward, their expressions a mix of shock and growing anger. Jason Thornton, who had been quietly sitting in the back, began to sweat. Tom Harrison documented everything, his military training ensuring no detail was missed. Sarah Paddle live-streamed the presentation, ensuring transparency. By the time Elena finished, the carefully constructed facade of the Pinewood Estates HOA had crumbled. What remained was a naked display of corruption, nepotism, and systematic abuse of power. The war had truly begun. In the back of the room, Elena's garden seemed to whisper its support, a living testament to the power of resilience, of growth that cannot be contained by arbitrary rules. The community center had never seen anything like it. What was typically a sterile, monotonous monthly gathering had transformed into a battlefield of suburban democracy. Every seat was filled, with residents standing in the back and lining the walls. The air crackled with anticipation, a collective energy that spoke of years of suppressed frustration finally finding its voice. Maxwell Thornton arrived precisely at 7:00 p.m., his trademark navy blazer pressed to military-like precision, a facade of calm masking the storm brewing beneath. He surveyed the room, momentarily taken aback by the unprecedented turnout. Typically, these meetings were sparsely attended, a strategic choice that had allowed the board to operate with minimal scrutiny. Not tonight. Elena Rodriguez sat in the front row, her forensic accounting binder open, each tab meticulously labeled, each page a potential weapon in the coming confrontation. Beside her, Tom Harrison, his military bearing a silent promise of strategic precision, reviewed their prepared statements. Martha Jenkins worked the room, her decades of postal service having given her an uncanny ability to read people and build silent alliances. The meeting began with Maxwell's standard opening. "Welcome, residents of Pinewood Estates," he began, his voice a practiced blend of condescension and false warmth. "We're here to discuss the continued maintenance and improvement of our community." But the script had changed. When the floor opened for resident comments, Elena was the first to speak. Her presentation was a masterpiece of forensic storytelling. Each slide, each document peeled back another layer of the HOA's systematic corruption. She started with the landscaping contracts. Green Horizon Solutions, a company owned by Maxwell's nephew Jason, had been awarded multiple no-bid contracts totaling over $250,000 in the past 2 years. The evidence was irrefutable. Invoices for work never completed. Maintenance performed during impossible weather conditions. Billing for services that defied logic. "These aren't just financial discrepancies," Elena explained, her voice steady and clear. These are deliberate acts of fraud that have been stealing from every homeowner in this community." The room erupted in murmurs, then grew silent as she continued. Tom Harrison presented military-grade documentation of the selective enforcement. Homeowners who had challenged the board found themselves buried in citations. Those who remained silent were left alone. It was a system of intimidation so carefully constructed that most had never seen its true shape. Carlos Mendez detailed the architectural review process, revealing a labyrinth of arbitrary rules designed to maintain a suffocating uniformity. Sarah Patel had compiled a spreadsheet showing how certain homeowners, those with connections to the board, received rapid approvals for projects that would have been impossible for others. Maxwell Thornton's composure began to crack. His perfectly pressed blazer now seemed to constrict, sweat beading on his forehead. Jason, seated near the back, had gone pale. The most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. Margaret Collins, the oldest board member and previously Maxwell's staunchest supporter, stood up. "I've been silent for too long," she announced, her voice thin but determined. "What we've been doing is wrong." Margaret produced her own set of documents, years of meeting minutes, financial records, communications that painted a damning picture of systematic corruption. She had been collecting evidence for years, waiting for the right moment to speak. The room was electric. Residents who had felt powerless for years now saw a path forward. The carefully constructed wall of HOA authority was crumbling, brick by brick. As the meeting reached its climax, Maxwell Thornton realized something fundamental had changed. This was no longer about a garden or a flagpole or a birdhouse. This was about the very soul of their community. The rebellion of Sycamore Lane had reached its tipping point, and there was no turning back. The week following the explosive board meeting was a maelstrom of legal maneuvering and community tension. Sycamore Lane had transformed from a picture of suburban conformity to a battleground of civic rebellion. Lawn signs began to appear, not the pristine, HOA-approved variety, but handmade signs of support, each one a small act of defiance. Margaret Collins became the unexpected hero of the neighborhood. At 78, she was not the type of woman anyone would have expected to become a whistleblower. Her husband, Robert, had been one of the original board members when Pinewood Estates was first developed. For decades, she had watched the HOA evolve from a well-intentioned community organization to a tyrannical regime of petty regulations. In her modest living room, surrounded by decades of carefully preserved documents, Margaret began to unravel the true history of the HOA. Her hands, slightly trembling but still precise, sorted through files that told a story far more complex than anyone had imagined. "It wasn't always like this," she told Elena, who sat across from her, taking careful notes. "When Robert and the other founders created the HOA, it was about protecting our community's character, not controlling every aspect of our lives." The documents told a different story from the one Maxwell Thornton had been spinning for years. Early board meeting minutes revealed a gradual transformation. What started as simple guidelines for maintaining property values had become a suffocating system of control. Margaret's most significant contribution was a series of financial records that predated Maxwell's tenure. They revealed a pattern of gradual manipulation, a slow erosion of the board's original mission. Jason Thornton wasn't the first to exploit the system. He was simply the most brazen. The real turning point, Margaret explained, came about 15 years ago when Maxwell first joined the board. He saw the HOA as a personal fiefdom, not a community service. Elena discovered something even more shocking. The original bylaws had a provision for community recall, a method for homeowners to remove board members who were not acting in the community's best interest. It was a clause that had been deliberately obscured in recent years, buried in fine print and legal jargon. Tom Harrison's military background proved invaluable. He helped Elena and Margaret navigate the legal intricacies of the recall process. Carlos Mendez used his architectural expertise to validate the technical aspects of their challenge. The community began to mobilize. What had started as Elena's personal fight against a garden violation had become a full-scale neighborhood uprising. Sarah Paddle created a secure online platform where homeowners could share their experiences, document violations, and organize their efforts. Martha Jenkins leveraged her Postal Service connections, reaching out to longtime residents who had been silenced or intimidated over the years. Each conversation revealed another layer of the HOA's systematic suppression. As they compiled their evidence, a broader picture emerged. The HOA was not just a local problem. It was a symptom of a larger issue of power and control in suburban communities. Maxwell Thornton and his allies had turned a community organization into a personal fiefdom, using bureaucratic language as a weapon of control. Margaret's decision to speak out came with personal cost. Some of her longtime friends on the board attempted to ostracize her, but she stood firm. "I've watched this community for decades," she told Elena, "and I'll be damned if I let it be destroyed by small-minded bureaucrats." The recall process began to take shape. Legal documents were prepared, signatures collected, a groundswell of support building with each passing day. Maxwell Thornton's carefully constructed world was crumbling, one document at a time. In Elena's garden, the tomatoes ripened, the peppers hung heavy on their vines. What had begun as a simple act of growing food had become a symbol of resistance, a testament to the power of individual spirit against institutional control. The unexpected ally had arrived, and nothing would be the same again. The county courthouse steps had never seen such a gathering. What began as a neighborhood dispute had become a landmark moment for community governance. Residents from Pinewood Estates filled the plaza, a sea of diverse faces united by a single purpose, reclaiming their right to self-determination. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of the storm, her carefully prepared legal documents tucked into a worn leather briefcase. The recall petition was a masterpiece of civic engagement, each signature meticulously verified, each complaint documented with forensic precision. Behind her, the neighborhood she had inadvertently united stood in solidarity. The legal proceedings were a testament to months of painstaking preparation. Tom Harrison's military-level documentation, Martha Jenkins' institutional knowledge, Carlos Mendez's architectural expertise, all converged in this moment. Sarah Patel's digital documentation platform had become a crucial piece of evidence, providing a comprehensive record of the HOA's systematic abuses. Margaret Collins arrived with her own arsenal of historical documents. Decades of board meeting minutes, financial records, and correspondence painted a damning picture of the HOA's gradual descent into bureaucratic tyranny. Her testimony would be the linchpin of their case. Inside the courtroom, Maxwell Thornton looked smaller than ever. The tailored blazer that once seemed a symbol of authority now hung loosely on his frame. His nephew Jason sat beside him, the weight of their actions finally catching up to them. The proceedings were a surgical deconstruction of the HOA's practices. Elena presented their case with the precision of a forensic accountant and the passion of a community organizer. Each piece of evidence peeled back another layer of corruption, inflated contracts, selective enforcement, financial mismanagement. "This is not about a garden," Elena argued, her voice clear and unwavering. "This is about the fundamental right of homeowners to have a voice in their own community." The judge, a no-nonsense woman with decades of experience in municipal law, listened intently. She had seen many HOA disputes, but never one so meticulously documented. As the day progressed, the full extent of the HOA's misconduct became clear. It wasn't just about financial impropriety. It was about a systematic attempt to control, to suppress individual expression, to reduce a vibrant community to a uniform, lifeless landscape. Tom Harrison testified about the selective enforcement that targeted certain homeowners. Martha Jenkins revealed the intimidation tactics used to silence dissent. Carlos Mendez exposed the arbitrary nature of the architectural review process. But the most powerful testimony came from the residents themselves. One by one, they shared stories of harassment, of dreams deferred, of small acts of resistance crushed under the weight of bureaucratic control. The turning point came with Margaret Collins' testimony. She spoke not with anger, but with a profound sadness for what the HOA had become. "This is not what we intended," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We wanted to protect our community, not control it." As the day wore on, it became clear that this was more than a legal proceeding. It was a referendum on the nature of community itself. When the judge finally delivered her ruling, the courthouse erupted. Maxwell Thornton and the entire existing board were removed. A temporary committee would be established to oversee new elections, with strict guidelines to prevent future abuses. Outside, the neighborhood erupted in celebration. It wasn't just a victory against a corrupt HOA. It was a victory for community spirit, for individual expression, for the right to exist authentically in one's own home. Alina's garden, the spark that had started it all, seemed to bloom even more vibrantly. The tomatoes hung heavy. The peppers glowed like beacons of resistance. What had begun as a simple act of growing food had transformed into a movement. As the sun set on Sycamore Lane, something fundamental had changed. The neighborhood would never be the same again. 6 months had passed since the landmark HOA hearing. Sycamore Lane was no longer just a street. It had become a symbol of community transformation, a beacon of hope for neighborhoods across the country struggling with similar bureaucratic oppression. Alina Rodriguez stood in her garden, now officially protected as a personal agricultural zone, a designation that had become a point of pride for the entire neighborhood. The tomato vines that had started the entire rebellion now stretched magnificently, a living testament to resilience. Neighbors would stop by, not to issue citations, but to admire the growth, to share gardening tips, to celebrate the victory they had won together. The new HOA board looked nothing like its predecessor. Diverse, transparent, and genuinely committed to community welfare, it represented a radical reimagining of neighborhood governance. Margaret Collins served as an advisory member, ensuring the original spirit of community protection remained intact. Sarah Patel had developed a digital platform that allowed real-time communication and voting, breaking down the barriers that had previously kept residents isolated. Tom Harrison had taken charge of creating clear, fair guidelines that protected homeowners' rights while maintaining a sense of community standards. Gone were the arbitrary rules that had once suffocated individual expression. In their place stood a set of principles that celebrated diversity, creativity, and personal autonomy. The ripple effects extended far beyond Sycamore Lane. Local news outlets picked up their story. Homeowners from other neighborhoods began reaching out, seeking guidance on challenging their own HOA boards. Alina found herself speaking at community forums, teaching others how to document, organize, and fight back against institutional overreach. Carlos Mendez redesigned the architectural review process, creating a transparent system that encouraged innovation rather than suppressing it. Homeowners could now express their individuality through home design, landscaping, and personal touches that had previously been forbidden. Martha Jenkins, with her decades of institutional knowledge, helped draft a comprehensive homeowners' Bill of Rights that was now being considered by local municipalities. What had begun as a personal struggle had transformed into a movement for systemic change. The most profound changes were personal. Neighbors who had previously existed in isolation now knew each other. Block parties became common. A community garden sprouted in a previously unused common area, with residents of all backgrounds contributing and sharing. Jason Thornton, Maxwell's nephew, faced legal consequences for his role in the financial improprieties. The investigation had uncovered a web of corruption that extended beyond the HOA, leading to broader accountability in local government contracting. On the 1-year anniversary of their rebellion, the residents of Sycamore Lane held a celebration. It wasn't just a party. It was a commemoration of their collective power. Alina's garden served as the centerpiece, a living reminder of how a single act of defiance could transform an entire community. We didn't just fight against something, Alina told the gathered neighbors. We fought for something. The right to be ourselves, the right to create, to grow, to exist authentically. Maxwell Thornton, now a disgraced figure, had disappeared from the community. Rumors suggested he was fighting multiple legal battles stemming from the investigation, but for the residents of Sycamore Lane, he was already a footnote in their larger story of transformation. The garden continued to grow. Tomatoes ripened. Peppers flourished. Children played in yards that were no longer uniform and sterile, but vibrant and alive with individual expression. As the sun set on Sycamore Lane, it illuminated more than just a street. It showed a community reborn, not through destruction, but through understanding, not through control, but through collaboration. What had started with a simple garden had become a revolution.